Today we'd like to talk about how to interpret these reports. There's an enormous amount of data in here, but there's a fairly simple way to overview all the data and come to some legitimate conclusions after your analysis. What you see before you here is an example of a report. We're color-coded to indicate standard deviations from the normative values. If you go to the end of the report, there's a section here that averages all the tasks, excluding the eyes closed task, for all the variables. So on the screen here, we have phase beta 2, and we have the average standard deviation across all the cognitive activation tasks. So for example, FP1, FP2, phase beta 2, 32 to 64 Hertz. The subject's value is about 2 standard deviations above the norm. So the orange and yellow indicate above, blue indicates below, white indicates within a half a standard deviation of the norm. So in this particular instance, you have an example of the T3 value being the weakest link in this individual's brain. On the bottom row here, these numbers represent the average standard deviation of all the locations relevant to or related to FP1. So it's 1.83 average standard deviation emanating from FP1, 1.72 from FP2, etc. This very easily allows you, and quickly allows you to look at the overall pattern to see where the pattern of deficits reside. In this particular situation, it's the T3 phase beta 2, which even though within normal limits is certainly well below the rest of the brain's functioning. Up here in the middle, you see FPU, FCPU, CPU, and PPU, and these represent the following variables: the frontal processing unit, the average correlation between all the locations in the frontal lobe on the particular frequency, the central processing unit, posterior processing unit, and our frontal central processing unit, which has proven to be particularly effective and relevant. So going back to this particular subject, if we move up, now we're looking at phase beta 1. And you can see generally the subject is above normal values, except again for T3. And we can see the frontal CPU averaging 1.13 standard deviations above the norm. And we'll get some weaknesses, relative weaknesses here in C3 and P3. Now we move up to alpha phase, and we're starting to see some weaknesses going on, particularly at T3, where he's at minus 1.14. Also T5 and P3 are showing relative weaknesses. This is average across all the tasks, so when you go to an individual task, we have to see if that's maintained. We go to phase theta, and again we have some problems emanating in the phase theta frequency, pretty much across the head. Don't normally do much interventions with theta because it's sometimes positive and sometimes a negative variable. So pretty much focusing on the alpha to beta 2 frequencies. Moving up more, we have now delta phase, and you can see they're very high in the frontal area, but the weakness is in the back here. But again, delta phase doesn't generally show a positive correlation with performance, so I generally ignore this. Then we go up, and now we have coherence values, beta 2, and again, it's a relative weakness at T3, but by and large, many of these numbers are quite respectable. Now we go to coherence, beta 1, again, the relative problem with T3 and C3. We go to coherence alpha, we have a big problem going on here. T3, C3, T5, and P3 want all left hemisphere locations for coherence alpha. So this begins to look like this is where the major problem is in terms of phase and coherence alpha. We'll go up to coherence theta, and again, showing more deficits in a lower frequency, but generally not the focus of an intervention. And again, coherence delta, showing below norm. And then we go up into The magnitude values, relative power and peak frequency, and again you're seeing the blue represents considerably below normal on delta and theta, alpha, and even beta 1 in terms of magnitude, and relative power, a similar pattern. You generally do not want to see people, individual subjects this low. You want to see them within a range, so this presents a potential problem for this client. Peak frequency doesn't seem to have any major problems. In fact, these are respectable numbers. So that gives you an average, a look at the average response pattern across all different tasks, which is very helpful if you want to override some of the defaults. If you found a problem that's very persistent but doesn't come up on the variables that the software is indicating in needing intervention. So you can then go to the individual task and see in particular, I'm not going to do working memory. You can go to problem solving. So again, he's showing pretty good strength, except maybe in the back of the head some. This is phase beta 2. Phase beta 1, again, frontally looks pretty good. Problem seems to be in the back of the head. So the issue is whether phase beta 1 in the back of the head is relevant to performance. Then we go to phase alpha, and again we got a T3 problem showing up, as well as T5 and P3. And now we go and see the phase theta, similar pattern from before, and phase delta, and then we go to coherence, beta 2, and very respectable, maybe some posterior issues. Coherence beta 1, again a relative weakness at T3, and we go to coherence alpha, and we see the T3 problem again, along with P3 and T5. So this is a way to sort of go through all the different tasks, and you can do this for reading and obviously by memory as well. And you get a pattern that you can see where the deficits are. So if the software is not going after the deficits which you believe are there, then you can design a variable and set up the intervention to go after the particular set of locations. Hopefully this is helpful. Thank you for your time.